So I think, without further ado, I will hand over to Amir, who's is he that side of me? Yes, he's that side of me. And then you look the other way. Right, there you are. And he's going to tell us all about his presentation. Amir, I'll leave it over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. As Nick said, it's amazing to see the number of people joining, and we were looking at the tickets sort of flying away. It was quite staggering to kind of see the level of interest, and it's really great because Stoke Newington history is something that I started about 7 years ago as a very geeky, nerdy hobby. I never expected to have this much of a kind of wide interest. And it's really great to see that there's a lot of people that are interested, that kind of get in touch. I learn from them almost every day with the material that they're sending me. Today I'm going to share with you a small sample from the amazing collection that the Hackney Archives have of old photos of Stoke Newington. They have photos of the whole borough, but my interest is specifically Stoke Newington, and I had to pick a few photos. It was very, very difficult, as I'm going to show you, to really cherry pick some photos and share with them tonight. This is a talk I gave a couple of years ago, but this time I've got a bit more time, so I've added a few more bits, and also along the way mention other historical anecdotes that relate to the photos that I'm going to be showing. For those of you who don't know me or don't sort of follow the Twitter, just to give you a quick chance to get familiar with the website, with the Twitter, with the Instagram and the Facebook. My website is stokenewingtonhistory.com. Believe it or not, it was free when I bought it. I was quite surprised by that. And that's really where you can get updates about all the upcoming events. You can access all the previous talks by myself and by guest speakers that attended the events as well. You can also sign up to the mailing list, as Nick mentioned. There's a few links dotted around. If you're on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, you're welcome to follow me. There's typically daily updates. I don't know how, even after 7 years, there's still content to share with the world. People get in touch with me with things they uncovered in attics and underground, and I sometimes come across things on eBay and whatnot. So for your daily dose of Stoke Newington history, you can follow it on every conceivable channel. And it's always great to kind of hear from people, being able to answer questions. So as Nick said, if you have any questions about the talk tonight, just write it down in the chat. We'll do our best to fish out all those questions, and I've got the whole evening to answer all of them. So don't be shy, I'm in no rush. So hopefully you managed to get all that. This talk is all about the Hackney Archives and their online catalogue. Those of you who may know, for a very long time, if you wanted to go through the digital photo collection, you had to physically go to the Hackney Archives in Dalston Junction. I always enjoyed it. It was a real treat. You kind of get a bit of alone time. But luckily, since January, the catalogue is now online. And in a few seconds, you're going to hear from Hannah from the Hackney Archives about the catalogue, before I'm then going to jump in and take you on a stroll down memory lane, down Church Street, all the way from Green Lanes to the High Street. So before we do that, let's just hear from the Hackney Archives about the online catalogue.
Hi, my name's Hannah, and I work at Hackney Archives as a Senior Archives Officer. We're delighted that some of our images have been used today, and would like to give you a bit of a background to the images from our online image database featured in today's talk. In January this year, we launched our new online catalogue. The catalogue has been a saviour during the COVID crisis in allowing our users to access our collections while the archive's been closed. As part of this, we launched an image database. The images featured on the database are not new. In fact, some of them were created in the late 1990s in a project called HA2000. HA2000 aimed to make digital surrogates of the images featured in Hackney Archives collections. Although this started out as a small number, we now feature over 17,000 images and counting on our catalogue. Previously, these images had only been accessible on-site, and although this may have been pioneering for the 1990s, this was very limiting, In fact, our choice of software for our catalogue was informed by our desire to showcase our image library online. To use our catalogue, you can either search by team keyword or place or person, or you can explore the collections as created by the Hackney Archives team. If you wanted to become a registered user, you will also open up the ability to create collections of your own or save searches that you can share with others. A quick note on our descriptions. I'd like to stress that our catalogue is a work in progress and may have some glitches, inaccuracies and misplaced data, but please bear with us. While we welcome feedback and corrections, it may take some time to make the changes, as before adding any information in the description, we must verify it through research, which we do not currently have the capacity for. In the meantime, we are looking at ways to incorporate comments, memories, context from the community into our catalogue in a way which acknowledges people's comments and suggestions, so please watch this space. If you see an image on our catalogue that you'd like a copy of, please do contact us. We're happy to supply high-resolution images for a fee. For more information on fees and charges, please head to our website. On social media, we are happy to support the use of watermarked images for free, but please can we ask that you tag us or link to our online catalogue. Our handles for social media are on screen now. A small note on why we use watermarks. Watermarks gives us the ability to accredit our work. To create digitalised images, it takes a lot of resources and time. Furthermore, money generated from the copying service is recycled back into our service to make sure that we can have a legacy and that our collections are healthy and looked after. If you have any questions from today's presentation or anything regarding archives in Hackney, please do contact us. You can either do this through social media, through direct messaging, or by email by emailing archives@hackney.co.uk. Unfortunately, at the moment where we are closed, we have limited access to our telephone inquiry service. We are also closed until further notice, but we are working on this. Our website can also be a helpful outlet for information, so please do check there if the answer to your question already exists. Thank you for listening to me today, and I really encourage you to look on our image library. I myself had learned a lot about Hackney by just typing in the street that I live on or the place I work. Thank you for listening to me, and do contact us if you have any questions. Cheers.
Great, thanks Hannah. That was really informative and really useful. As Hannah said, you can go online and you can access the catalogue, and when you type in search Newington, you come up with hundreds and hundreds of photos, and I'm still going through them, by the way. It's an amazing collection, but for the purpose of this talk I had to really narrow down and, like I said, cherry pick a few of those. In order to put some structure and context into it, I decided to pick photos along Stoke Newington Church Street. Stoke Newington is either very small or very big, depending on your perspective, but to make sure that the sites I'm going to be talking about are probably most recognizable and most familiar, I thought that focusing on Church Street would be the right approach. I know that some people asked in the chat as well about other places like Lordship Grove and other streets and areas. First of all, I recommend you go online and see what the archives have. Otherwise, get in touch afterwards. I'm more than happy to share anything I've collected and anything that I know. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a stroll down Church Street on a nice sunny Sunday, or at least we can pretend it is. We're going to start at the very top, Green Lanes, and walk all the way down towards the High Street, passing Ebony Park Cemetery and other landmarks that I'm sure most, if not everyone on this talk is familiar with. So let's begin at the very top. So imagine that you just, I don't know, got off the bus and you're just sort of around sort of Green Lanes, Church Street, where Cleastold Park is. If you went there a long time ago, you would see this, right? And this is a really great drawing of Newington Hall. And Newington Hall looks like something out of a fairy tale. It's quite a grand detached villa. You can see that obviously sort of big front garden, and as you're going to see in a minute, back garden as well. And this was Stoke Newington pre-Victorian era. It was a small village. It was pretty much Church Street with a few houses and taverns on the high street, but that was the settlement, that was the parish. And it drew very wealthy merchants and bankers. Most of them were dissenters that found refuge and kind of were able to worship in peace in this rural village outside London. And this is where they could live in such mansions and such villas and still commute to London down the A10 as some of us do today. Newington Hall, as you might see from the caption, was built in 1821 and it was pulled down in 1875. And this was the story with a lot of these big, large mansions. Housing development has been a running theme throughout sort of London's history, as we're going to see. And if you were there today, if you're kind of struggling to think, where was Newington Hall? This is where it is today. It was just on the corner of Church Street and Clissold Crescent. And when it was knocked down, as was the case with all these big houses that were very typical and common in Church Street, the Victorians just built houses and houses and kind of all these terraces that are now a very familiar landscape. So if you think about this single house that was pulled down in the 1870s, it was replaced with a number of houses both on Church Street and Green Lanes and an extra street. Just to give you a sense of a side-by-side comparison. Sometimes people ask, why did they knock it down? Couldn't they turn it to flats or maybe like a nice hotel? The reality is in the 1870s, the metropolis was growing almost by the year. People were moving into these villages that were absorbed by London, and small villages like Stoke Newington became basically suburbs or districts of London. So builders and developers saw the opportunity of all this prime real estate and replacing the old big mansions with more modern or kind of much more housing. The name actually Newington Hall is still around. The builders were kind enough to retain the name, and some of those houses that were built on the site of Newington Hall were actually called Newington Hall Villas, and they were numbered as such. So you might be living in number 1 Newington Hall Villas or number 2, number 3. In 1937, there was a wide renaming and renumbering, and a lot of those, if you like, sort of rows and terraces that used to have their own names were basically abolished, and they were incorporated into the Church Street numbering. So this was, in a way, almost like a street sign. And if you go through the old directories, you can still see that as the original address. Here's another view of Newington Hall. Again, hard to believe that this is our beloved Stoke Newington. You've got the New River at the back. This is where Aden Terrace is now, and we're going to see a bit of that. You've got a young couple walking around, maybe thinking if they should place an offer on that fine house, looking on sort of Zoopla potentially. But this was it. This was Stoke Newington around sort of the 1850s, 1840s, very much a rural, very affluent village in many ways. This is the sale plan for Newington Hall, and it gives you a sense of kind of where it was and the map and the overall grounds. So you can see Newington Hall bang in the middle. A lot of these houses had very kind of big pleasure grounds, back gardens that today you would think are sort of ridiculous. But back then, that was quite a typical size for the overall grounds. And you have the New River, like I said. You can also notice there are 2 bridges in this map. You've got Paradise Bridge, basically Stoke Newington Church Street, and then you've got Park Lane Bridge. And that's going to be my next focus. So if you were looking at Newington Hall and you kept walking a bit more and you kind of turned right into Clissold Crescent, you would see Park Lane Bridge, right? And this is the view from, if you're thinking about, you're standing at Clissold Crescent and you're looking towards Clissold Park. You can see the bridge, right? The bridge was probably built in the early 19th century. And you can actually notice as well that the road was much narrower. A lot of these roads were not designed and built clearly for vehicles, and they were typically 1 lane wide. And this bridge, as I'm going to show you in a minute, was demolished when the road was widened. If you're still struggling to picture where is that, I don't really see where this could be. This is the view today, right? So you've got the New River Cafe, highly recommended greasy spoon on a Sunday or Saturday. But this is the view today, and you can see that the road was completely widened and the bridge was demolished. Here's a nice close-up of that bridge and all the ironwork If you're fascinated as I am with post boxes and pillar boxes, you can also see that there used to be a penfold style post pillar at the very bottom, and that's gone. They're quite rare. I think there's only 168 remaining original ones in the country. If you go to the allotments that are now where the New River used to be, there's actually this little sign that says the Park Lane Bridge was demolished when the road was widened in 1931. It's very easy to miss. There's a lot of sort of sometimes even sort of rubbish being dumped, but that's it. Another photo of the same view, if you take a few kind of steps back, again shows you just how narrow that road used to be. On the right, behind the wooden fence, as I'm going to show in a minute, was a big mansion called the Willows. It was then renamed Canaway Hall. But this was very much still a very rural, small village before a lot of the housing development really sort of kicked off between 1860s and 1890s. This is what it looks like today. Quite different, you have to admit. Like I said, road widening is going to be a common theme that's going to get mentioned in this talk, because that was mainly in the 1930s and sometimes the 1920s, something that resulted in demolition of some of those old features. Just to give you a chance to soak it all in as a side-by-side comparison. I mean, people think that and say that, rightly so, that Stoke Newington is very nice today, but it used to be a very picturesque, very quiet village. A lot of photos, a lot of postcards as well, especially kind of late Victorian, early Edwardian, that capture a lot of that scenery. This is another great view. This one is looking now down from the bridge all the way down to Clissold Crescent. I don't even think that Carysford Road existed by that point, as you can tell. And you can actually see that the houses in the back are not the current Victorian houses. Those are actually older houses. And the ironwork that you can see on the right, you can also see in the drawing of Newington Hall. So they actually retained some of the kind of the ironwork for the bridge, and that was removed when the bridge was demolished in 1931. But if you notice just how narrow it is, and this is the view today. All right, so thanks for Google Street Map. It's possible to kind of have that nice sort of view, and it's quite nice even when you look at old photos to be able to quickly drop the little yellow man and see what the view looks like today. This is a side-by-side. So this was really the, if you like, the top bit of Church Street. We had Newington Hall, you had the New River, you had Park Lane Bridge, really creating that very lovely, very kind of picturesque scene. So let's keep walking down towards Church Street, just sort of passing Clissold Crescent. If you were looking east towards St. Mary's Church, this would be the view, believe it or not. This is Church Street. On the left, you've got the New River. The New River was constructed in 1613 to bring fresh drinking water from Hertfordshire to London. It used to terminate in Islington, in Sadler's Wells, but since 1946, it terminates in the East Reservoir. And all these sections that used to run between the East Reservoir and Islington were drained and filled in bit by bit. But this used to be the view for a very long time. I'm going to talk a bit more about the New River shortly. And you can see that you had all these grand old houses on basically the other end of it. And that whole stretch, that whole kind of row of very kind of grand houses was called Paradise Row. And the houses were numbered 1 Paradise Row, 2 Paradise Row, and they each have their own name as well. And when you think about the view, that you woke up in the morning with your morning paper and you kind of look outside and you've got the New River, you've got the park, and at that point the park was a private estate, so it was very quiet. You kind of get a sense why they called it Paradise Row. And I'm going to talk in a bit about some of these houses, but just to give you a sense of what that view looks like today. Okay, a bit different. Things have changed since the days of Paradise Row. Housing development, as I mentioned, you had the housing developments of the Victorian era that saw the end of Newington Hall. This row of houses in Paradise Row was demolished during the 30s and in the 50s as well. There was a lot of development in the 30s and post-war development as well. And people needed space. People needed all this land to build block of flats to house, in the 30s, people that used to live in what were defined as slum clearance areas, very old, dilapidated houses. And post-war, people had to be housed when their houses were bombed. So there was always a need to find spaces for houses. And, you know, unfortunately, it was those large old houses that typically would make way. This is a side-by-side view of Paradise Row with the lovely New River. People sometimes think and kind of comment on Twitter that the New River still runs underground. I'm afraid that's not the case. So if you're jogging and you're thinking I'm jogging over the New River, you're not. It was drained and it was filled in. The section that's currently in the park now is technically a pond. It's not connected to the New River. I'm sorry to burst that bubble. And it just runs in a loop. If you notice, it doesn't even move. You know, if it was a river, the water would actually be moving, but it is just a crescent-shaped pond. If you then kind of hopped over Paradise Bridge to Clissold Park and you were looking at Paradise Row, this would be the view, right? I mean, it's quite staggering to imagine that this was at our doorstep. The massive house that is a house, it's not a hotel. This was the Willows. And next to it, you had Warwick House, and then you had Vincent House, and all these were sort of single occupancy. I guess if they were still around today, there would probably be about 20 to 12 buzzers by the front door. If you zoom in a bit more, another kind of great view of the Willows. Okay, the Willows was built for George William Alexander. He was the founding treasurer of the British and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society in 1839, and it was demolished in 1953. Stoke Newington was a hotbed of a lot of radical ideas, progressive thoughts, both politically, religiously. A lot of social reformers lived in Stoke Newington, and Paradise Row specifically was home to very wealthy Quakers who were abolitionists, who were campaigning for women's rights, women's education, open spaces movements. A lot of that was very much concentrated in Paradise Row, and the Willows, later named Canaway Hall, was definitely, I think, one of the most impressive houses in Paradise Row. The estate that's currently there is actually called Canaway Estate, so if you ever wondered about the name. Let's move slightly further down and turn around, so looking west. Here we can see Paradise Row changing. This is a view in 1953, and you can see that some of all those houses we just looked at, the Willows and Vincent House and Warwick House, they're all gone now. Even Paradise House was replaced in the 30s with Millington House. The New River is still there, but not for long. You can see the construction happening in the background, and the 50s was really that point where Paradise Row was being transformed, and those old houses were being knocked down and replaced with modern housing blocks. The New River looks really, really nice there with kind of the sun kind of reflecting. Would have been quite a view. For those of you who complain that sometimes that the pavement on that side of Church Street is very narrow, there didn't used to be one, right? So you can imagine, you could maybe kind of stand over the railings, but there didn't used to be sort of pavement. But once they drained and filled in the New River, that's when they created the pavement that still in some parts is quite narrow. This is a view of the original course of the New River. It used to start way sort of up north in Hertfordshire, and you can see it using kind of going all the way down through the reservoirs as it's made its way to Islington. I kind of pointed as well where Church Street is, and you can see where kind of that almost sort of that horseshoe shape, it kind of entered the park, did the little kind of bend where Clissold House is, and then along Church Street, through sort of under Paradise Bridge, under Park Lane Bridge, Aidan Terrace, and then Petherton Road, Canonbury, all the way to Islington. There's another great view of the New River. I can never get enough of it. I usually kind of think, why? We're getting closer to the church. This is really, I guess this was taken from inside the park, just where Paradise Bridge was. So if you imagine, this was the point where the New River just went under Church Street as it left the park. And you can see people kind of leaning against the railings. I guess some of them might have sort of fish as well. A very nice view. Now, one of the reasons why I like these photos is because if you got a good quality one, you can really zoom in and do almost a forensic analysis of some of these. And I get a real kick, as some of you might know, from spotting old street signs, as I'm going to show you, or in this case, an old boundary marker, right? So for the untrained eye, what I kind of highlighted in yellow, you might think is a reflection or just a piece of, I don't know, some rubbish that someone left, but that's actually a boundary marker, and it's long gone, it's not there. This would have been a boundary marker of Hornsey Parish. Half of Clissold Park originally was split between the parish of Stoke Newington and the parish of Hornsey, believe it or not. And I'm going to show you a map in a minute. The photo on the left is of an existing, surviving Hornsey Parish boundary marker, and that's in the park facing Green Lanes. So about maybe 30 seconds walk, if you turn right from Church Street, you can see this little guy just sort of peeking over the railings. But I always love zooming into these photos and spotting some of these old remnants that are long gone. Just to give you a sense of Hornsey Parish, because sometimes people think, how did Hornsey ended up in Clissold Park? Hornsey Parish was basically the space that today is, I would say, is modern Haringey. It used to be its own metropolitan borough when Stoke Newington was also its own borough. And you can see that half of Clissold Park was the very kind of bottom kind of bit of Hornsey Parish. And that's why it had those boundary markers dotted around. You can also see two Hornsey Parish boundary markers very close to the 393 bus stop opposite Clissold Road. There's a group of three. Two of them are Hornsey Parish and one is Stoke Newington. They're very easy to miss if you're not looking for those things. So next time you're waiting for the bus or you're just making your way into the park, it's worth having a look. They're quite interesting to look at. This is the photo, a sad one, that shows the river, the New River drained in 1958. You can see there's a tire. I think there's a number of tires. And this was really the state of it. I suspect, because it wasn't actually going anywhere, Paradise Bridge was demolished in 1948. So, I mean, I suspect it was just standing water. So in the photos, it looks quite nice, but I suspect that by the 50s, if it was really just standing water, especially in the summer, it wasn't a great sight. Smell probably wasn't great as well. So they just drained it, filled it, created the pavement, and that's the view that we know today. So we keep our sort of stroll down Church Street and we come across this view. Again, completely unrecognizable, and I'll give you a second just to kind of maybe try and imagine, where is that on Church Street? This was called Glebe Place. It was basically two pairs of quite grand semi-detached houses. So this is number 1 and 2, and there was an identical pair just next to it. Okay, again, you can see the nice wooden fence. There's also a quite interesting historical fire hydrant sign on the left, but I won't go into that. That's a whole different talk, maybe in the future. And the view today is this. Again, another example of just housing developments completely transforming the streetscape. And you could take the view that they should have left it alone, they should have renovated it, turned it into flats and whatnot. I guess that's a personal view. Keep in mind as well that a lot of those houses were quite old, so I don't think there was any proper sort of plumbing or central heating. And if you think about the number of flats that were built on the site of those old houses, I think I can understand why at the time at least they would justify knocking them down. The city was growing, Stoke Newington was growing. A lot of those old relics and old remnants, I guess, had to make way in some cases to accommodate just the need for constant housing. Let's keep walking down, passing the old church, passing Clissold Park. And if you look to your left, this was the view. Again, quite difficult to imagine where that is today. This is Church Row. It was originally a row of 9 houses. One was demolished when the churchyard was extended in the 1840s. They were built in 1695, actually on the site of the Tudor Manor House. So William Patten, you know, the guy from the school, So his actual Tudor manor house was on the site of that entire row. And when they knocked down the Tudor manor house, they built these really grand houses. And it was Church Row and Paradise Row that were the most affluent areas of Stoke Newington. If you look at the kind of the poverty maps of Charles Booth, you can actually see that, you know, it was Church Row and Paradise Row that were always yellow. The most affluent, the most sort of wealthy people used to live there. And this is the view today. So by the 1930s, the people that would typically live in these grand houses, they moved away. I suspect they couldn't just find people to move in. Those were really big houses. The prospect of splitting them to flats and modernizing them probably was not an option. It was also the case that the borough of Stoke Newington, that was created in 1900, was looking for a site for municipal buildings because its original town hall was in Milton Road, which is now called Milton Grove. So fairly further out from the central sort of hub of Stoke Newington. If you think you had the library, you had the electricity substation. So they were looking for a site where they can build a new town hall, a new assembly hall, and also extend the library. And Church Row, I suspect, was the most obvious place to do that. So they knocked down the houses in December 1934, and the town hall and the assembly hall and the reference library opened in 1937. You can also notice that Church Street at that point is, again, quite narrow. So if you look at where the pram is compared to where the people standing on the opposite side, it's one lane, right? There's no way you could get two cars today to kind of maneuver that space. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There's a nice drawing of Church Row in all its glory, front, back. I think it's also the ground floor. And this is a view that in Stoke Newington today, you don't really see anymore. We have a few houses, a few Georgian houses still standing, which is great, but to have a proper row of 8 of these grand houses by the 1930s, like I said, Paradise Row was changing, Church Row was changing. The archives have a great collection of photos that were taken when they were looking at the foundations. And when they tore down Church Row, they found all the foundations of the Tudor Manor House. And there's a lot of photos, I think about 30, that give you a sense of that original foundations and what they found when they excavated and put the foundation for the town hall. Very interestingly, and I only found that about a year ago, they salvaged some of those old, quite sort of small bricks and incorporated them into the new town hall. So if you go into the town hall, this is not where the assembly hall is. We've got the Christmas sort of market and so on. But it's actually the middle section where the offices are. You can see that they incorporated the bricks into the new brickwork. So you can clearly see where those bricks are. There's also a sign. I'll show you that one in a second. All right, it's really neat. One of them, the one on the right, you can actually see from the car park. So if you come from Clissold Park and you go just behind the town hall, you can see the collection of bricks there as well. This is the sign. It says, you know, these red bricks, you know, came from the foundations of the Manor House, circa 1550, which once stood here. They were discovered when the hall was built in 1936. Right, and I'm pretty sure that this is accessible to the public. So if you just during the day, I don't know if it's open right now with all the restrictions, but you can just walk in and really admire these relics. I was really chuffed to see them. So you're looking at Church Row on one end, but if you then look to your right, this was the view. Right, so this is Church Street and this is Albion Road. Right. And this is a very different view from the one that we know today, right? Because the Rose and Crown is not there. It's not in this photo, but it was actually across the street. The original location of the Rose and Crown, a very old tavern in Stoke Newington, was across the street from where the current pub is. And as I mentioned, by the 1930s, a lot of these narrow old country roads had to be widened. And in this case, it was the whole junction that was widened. And as a result, the old Rose and Crown was knocked down and new one was built just opposite. Right, which is the view that we all know and love today. There's a great photo, I don't actually have it here, where you can see both pubs at the same time, which is quite remarkable because you can imagine that the brewery didn't want to close the old pub before the new one opened, right? But that junction has changed considerably, just to give you a chance to appreciate that view. And as I mentioned, when you zoom in, it's quite nice. I'm fascinated with old street signs, as some of you know, and some of these photos are of really high quality, and you can really zoom in and you can start reading the signs on the kind of the shops and the windows, and you can actually see who was trading at 197 Church Street. I'll get to that in a second. And for me, it's quite easy these days to easily pinpoint who traded at what address on Church Street at what year. Because a couple of years ago, I took upon myself to document and survey all the commercial occupants of every address on Church Street from 1847 to present day. There's a terrific spreadsheet that you can spend the whole weekend looking at the address at the bottom. And that shows you for every number that you can see on the left, what was the old number, because the street was renumbered twice in 1880 and 1937. And who traded in each one of those addresses across that timeline. And it's really fascinating to see. I've got a talk just on that topic. So when I saw that photo, it was very easy for me to just do a quick find on 197. And here you see, you got Miss E.R. Wicks, confectioner. And it's also a good way to try and get a sense of when the photo was taken. So she was there in kind of basically from 1905 to 1910. Right, so it's also nice to cross-reference some of these resources. Moving on, we've got the library. The library opened in 1892. Okay, a building that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. It was extended over the years as well in 1904, in 1925, and 1937 when the reference library opened. And again, if you zoom in, I really like this photo as well for a number of reasons, not just the guy kind of leaning against the notice board, but you can see the site where now we have the entrance to the library, and that's the World War I Memorial Hall that was built in 1923. You can get a sense of the shop that was there and what that looked like, and also the old lamppost, which is another fascinating topic. It actually says Public Library on the glass. There's a small sign there as well, which is really neat. And as I did before, like I said, you can look at my property survey and very clearly see that, you know, the probably Henry or Howard Taylor chemist at that address until the Memorial Hall, which is now the entrance. This is another great view of the library. Right. I love this photo especially because you can see on the left there's a maid peeking through the window. You can imagine back then to have a photographer standing in the street with a tripod taking a photo was quite an unusual sight. I'm not sure if she knew she was being captured, and people are going to talk about her 100 years later in this sort of online YouTube stream. But I really love when you start, like I said, zooming into those photos and you find out and discover all these things. You can see again evidence of just how affluent Church Row was. There's a great photo of the interior of the library, right? Quite different from what it is today. There's a big sign just above the door. I think it reads "Silence," all kind of block capitals. Yeah, really, really nice. And like I said, there are hundreds of photos in the catalog, and you can spend evenings and weekends, and it's really great to be able to do that even on your phone. Especially if you've got something that you're really interested in, like the library in this case. So let's keep walking. The next view that we have is this one. And this is a very, very different scene from Church Row and Paradise Row. We looked at all these grand Georgian houses, affluent Stoke Newington, the bankers, the merchants, the very wealthy Quakers that lived in those houses. But Stoke Newington, even though it was predominantly a respectable, well-to-do district, in most cases, it did have some pockets of poverty. It did have some old courtyards that were originally built in some cases for the laborers. So quite small, old houses, quite dilapidated as well. And this was one of the poorest streets in Stoke Newington. And as I'm going to explain in a minute, a lot of these houses that you see here were demolished and were declared a slum clearance area. The view today, though, is very different, the exact opposite. This is Barn Street. And Barn Street, as some of you might know, is now a cul-de-sac off Church Street. So this is the view from the end of Barn Street, where it is now, looking towards Church Street. Barn Street used to connect Church Street and Lordship Terrace, and that photo is taken from Lordship Terrace. So it's really not a view you can do unless you're standing on the top of Denman House. So I couldn't really do that. Just to show you on the map, this is an 1890s map. So you get a sense of the street, and you can also just appreciate how tiny the houses were, especially the ones that you can see on the left. There was no back garden. There were probably just 1 or 2 rooms. And you can appreciate why by the 1930s they were declared a slum clearance area. Those that were demolished were replaced with modern flats, Denman House in this case. So this is a view that gives you a sense of where that photo was taken from. Right, so you can see that houses on Edwards Lane, Barn Street, Lordship Terrace and Lordship Road were knocked down in 1937 when Denman House was built in order to make way for these modern flats. I love that photo as well because in the background you can see a long gone pub that used to stand in Church Street. This was the Falcon. It closed down in 1919. The building was still there, was converted to shops until at least the 60s, as far as I'm aware. But again, it's nice when you can start zooming in and really kind of investigate the forensic level some of these photos. Let's move down. Another pub, okay? This is probably one of my favorite pubs in Church Street. It's quite difficult to place, and you think, which one is that? Is that the Old Shillelagh? Is that Ryan's? What's going on? This pub was first recorded in 1697 and it was rebuilt in 1924 when Lordship Road was rebuilt and widened. And this is it today. So the Red Lion, very much like the Rose and Crown, had to be pulled down when the road was widened. It was also designed by the same architect, by the way, that designed the Rose and Crown. And this is the pub. Sometimes you might go to pubs and you think, oh, this must be very, very old. I used to think that this was medieval, way back, only to be disappointed and realize 1924. There's a great photo looking from Lordship Road, and this was the view before it was widened. And you can clearly see that the pub, again, was quite sort of towards the road itself. The roundhouse had 2 windows on either side. You're going to see there's only 1 now. And again, if you look at the position of the car and the pavement, it was very narrow. And this is the view today. So they kind of truncated and had to kind of take a slice out of all those houses. And in the case of the Red Lion, the lion was put to bed and a new pub was built. Just next to the lion, this was the view. Okay, there used to be a depot, a brewery depot, the wheat bread one. Very different view now, and this was just next to the Red Lion. Give you a chance to absorb it. And this is the scene today. So you've got all the recycling bins. Very different proposition, you could say. And this is the side by side. Let's move on. We got about sort of 10 minutes and we're going to make it, I believe, or hope. Further down the road, we get now to the corner of Church Street and Park Street. Okay, and if you think, where's Park Street? Park Street was the original name of Yokeley Road. You can see the Clarence Tavern on the corner. And this was the view way back. It's a bit different now. You can see there used to be a shop on the corner. The house on the left in Yokeley Road was built in the 1830s, I suspect. It used to be part of a row of houses close to Church Street on both ends, and all of them were knocked down. This is the only house that is still there. Give you a second to admire and appreciate. This is the view today. You can see the house was actually extended. There's a whole kind of section to it where there used to be just 2 windows. Now there are 3. The post box is still there. This is the side by side. When you zoom in, if you're a bit of a street sign geek, as most of us are, you can not only see the old street name Park Street, but you can also see the old street sign with the pre-1917 N postal code, which was very exciting for me when I saw that. So Stoke Newington used to be N before there was N16 and N15 and so on. And in 1917, the numerical subdivisions were introduced, and Stoke Newington was basically mostly within N16, but also had a bit of N4 and a tiny bit of N5. So this gives us a chance to see also the old name, the old postal district, and the old street sign. This gives you just a quick view of some of the name changes. So there was quite a wholesale renaming of streets by the 1930s. A lot of those old street names were the old streets from the parish days, where every parish in London had a church street and a high street and a park road and a park street. But by the 1930s, it got quite confusing because there were just so many of those. So there was a decision to do a wholesale renaming and get rid of all those duplicate names. So we lost Paradise Row. Paradise Row is now in Bethnal Green, by the way. They won. But you can clearly see that there was renaming, which sometimes make it a bit difficult when you're researching your family history and you think, where was Park Street? Where was Park Road? So it's quite useful to be aware of those name changes. This is just a map of the old postal districts, and you can see Stoke Newington just at the very top highlighted in a dot within kind of the N postal district. There are only 4 surviving street signs with the N postcode within the boundaries of the old borough. There are a few more further east in Hackney, but Stoke Newington only has 4 surviving. And looking at that shop again, as I said, if you look at my ultra geeky spreadsheet, you can pinpoint exactly who was trading and when. So in this case, there was an oil shop all the way from the 1850s to the 1890s. And another zoom in, right? You can clearly see how you can spend whole weekends, if you can, just researching these photos. And this was the chemist. This is the only address in Church Street. This is number 100. It used to be number 82 before the renumbering. That has been a chemist continuously since the building was built in the 1860s. Different sort of managers and different brands or whatnot, but it's never been anything but a chemist. Right? And it's the only address in Church Street that can claim to have done that. Keep walking down the road, and this was the view. Again, large mansion, I believe 40 rooms. Very difficult to imagine where would that be today if only we had that at our fingertips. It's really difficult to imagine where that was on that sort of footpath, but actually, even though this is the back garden view, but imagine it's the front garden, looks quite similar. That was Ebony House, and Ebony House was built in 1700. It was the manorial estate of Sir Thomas Abney and Lady Mary Abney. It was knocked down in 1843. Abney Park, that was the arboretum, that was the back garden, if you like, of Ebony House, became a cemetery in 1840, became a garden cemetery. The house was there for another sort of 3 years, but by 1843 it was knocked down. All the features, all the materials were sold in auction. There's a poster and a catalogue that details all of them. So they didn't just bring a bulldozer and just knock it down. They were very careful to take it piece by piece. This is Sir Thomas Abney. So if you ever wondered about the name Abney that you see everywhere, Abney Park, and you've got Thomas Abney School, and you've got Abney Mews, and you've got Abney Dental Surgery, and you've got I think there's Abney Undertaker Services. It's everywhere, right? Sir Thomas Abney was the Lord of the Manor of Stoke Newington. He was the Lord Mayor of London as well, I think, for 1 year. And he was one of the co-founders of the Bank of England. So not a bad CV altogether. And he lived in Ebony House with Mary Abney, right? And as I said, for centuries, Stoke Newington attracted nobles, very wealthy people, dissenters. in most cases. And right next to Ebony House, if you keep strolling down, this was the view. So Ebony House was 40 rooms. Fleetwood House was 60 rooms, believe it or not. Maybe some of them were quite small box rooms as a bedsit. I don't know what was the setup. But this was probably one of the biggest mansions in Stoke Newington. You can see maybe the kind of the stables as well, where you would go in with kind of your carriage and so on. Fleetwood House was built in 1635 and was demolished in 1872. As I mentioned earlier, Newington Hall, Ebony House, Church Row, a lot of these old mansions, they were pulled down over the decades. And as new needs came and the people that would typically live in these big mansions moved further afield to the counties, most probably, when the middle class and the lower middle class swamped the old village, there was no real reason to keep them. In some cases, they were converted to colleges, maybe even factories in some cases. But after that was no longer needed, they were knocked down. When Fleetwood House was knocked down in 1872, it made way for a whole new street, Fleetwood Street. So if you ever wondered about the origin of that name, and also 7 houses on Church Street. And those houses were knocked down in 1975 to make way for a new fire station, which looks a bit different, more kind of brutalist style than the grand Fleetwood House. It was named after Charles Fleetwood, one of its inhabitants. Charles Fleetwood was the son-in-law of Oliver Cromwell. He was the Lord Deputy of Ireland and one of the kind of the top generals that were very active in the Civil War. And this is side by side. And this was the view from kind of the rear elevation of Fleetwood House. I mean, this could now just be a country estate, some hotel where you might book for a very lavish wedding. Definitely not Stoke Newington. We're coming to the end of our tour. We've walked down Church Street over the decades, over the centuries, admiring all the grand houses and kind of the quiet, narrow streets. Before the Victorians moved in, before 1930s, housing developments changed the streetscape, 1950s, post-war, 1970s, in the case of the wheat bread depot and so on. And now, almost towards the bottom of Church Street, you would see this view, a wooden house, very small. This was the village blacksmith, Storer's Forge. It was there for 200 years. It was a family business. Right, and this is a very, very old house. And it was also knocked down in the 1890s to make way for a new school, Church Street School, as it was originally called. It's now called William Patten. So you can see we went through the site of William Patten's Manor House, where Church Row was built, and then the Town Hall. And we finish in another kind of site that bears the same name. As I said, it was very difficult for me to cherry pick photos from the vast archives. There are plenty more. Maybe one day I'll do a volume 2 and do the High Street, or do Lordship Road, or do Clissold Park. There are just so many. Definitely go on the online catalog, maybe this evening or tomorrow. If you come across interesting photos, you have any questions, do ask me. I'm always interested and curious to see what people find out and what questions you might have. I hope you enjoyed the talk. It's been really fun and a real kick for me to be able to share all those photos and all that information with a very kind of invisible but fairly big audience, I would hope. This talk is going to be recorded as well, so you can access it many times if you're just a bit bored and want to listen again to the story about Paradise Row and Church Row. Hopefully there's some questions that I'll take in a second, but otherwise, thank you very much.
Don't worry, the audience that we've shipped in are COVID secure. They're clapping there. A superb talk. I don't need to grow your head. You know how exciting and interesting people find these, really, because it's their own area. And lots of the comments that are coming in now, as always, are complimenting the comprehensiveness of that. You talk about the archives and the fact that these are from the archives. One of the first questions, and I think many of us will know the answer to this, but of the 350 odd people who are watching, many won't have been to your talks. Sue Young asked, do you have access to Derek Baker's photo archive, and what's happened to it?
Yeah, good question. Derek Baker was a dear friend of mine. I was fortunate enough to spend the last year of his life visiting him almost every other Sunday, and he was very gracious and allowed me to scan a lot of the photos in his collection. I think over those visits I scanned about 800 photos, almost all of which I've shared online since. When Derek sadly passed away, he had 40 years worth of his sort of research, a lot of folders, a lot of material that he collected over the years. His family donated his entire collection to the Hackney Archives. I know that there is a plan at some point to catalog Derek's archive and hopefully making it accessible to the public so people can appreciate it. The bulk of it were 27 folders that Derek called the Stoke Newington Encyclopedia, and it's basically split into pubs and churches, and it's an amazing collection. I know for a fact the archives are not going to split it. They're very conscious and very careful to keep collections in their original structure and form. So that's really it. I'm hoping that it's going to be available online at some point. A lot of the photos that Derek had as postcards and printouts are in the Hackney Archives collection anyway. But there's a lot of additional material that I hope will become available one day.
Interesting. Inevitably, the issue of border has come up, and Annette Jones asked if you had any photos of Hahn's Bakery on Stoke Newington Green Road. I think, did you mean Green Lanes? 1, 2, 3, and then Lynn pointing out that may not be Stoke Newington.
So, I mean, the name itself doesn't ring a bell. I need to check. Some of Green Lanes was within the old parish and the later borough of Stoke Newington boundaries. So I'll need to look at the numbers. I can't really think about that off the top of my head, but it's definitely worth just punching Green Lanes and the address into the archives and see what comes up. Otherwise, just drop me a line at some point and I'll be happy to have a look at it myself.
Will Dawson noted as you switched along the Church Street, Paradise Way, we passed Shelford Place, but did it exist back then? I think it did, didn't it? Shelford Place has been around a long time, that industrial space.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as far as I'm aware, it was an industrial, probably kind of small workshops and factories, probably in the 40s and 50s. I'll need to have a look and see if it also existed when it was Paradise Row. If it did, I suspect it was maybe one of the entrances to one of the houses. I can't imagine there was much work happening in Paradise Row, which, like I said, was a very affluent part of the village. But I'll need to check the old maps.
Question about, have you seen the photo of the old board game factory on Northwold Road next to, near to the current site of the Tower Theatre? I wonder where that was.
I have not. As some of you might know, my focus is the old borough. So I do take interest in streets that are very close to the boundaries, but I don't research them with the same rigor and interest. So Northwold Road is a bit of a grey area, so I can't say it rings a bell, I'm afraid.
Annette Antoniades would love to see photos of Green Lanes opposite the park and Queen's Drive, where 4 generations of family have lived to date. I mean, you've used that interface now. It's presumably pretty easy to just type in.
Yeah. I mean, there's great. I mean, the view in Green Lanes opposite the park was amazing. It's very similar houses in size and style as the one you get in Highbury New Park, right? So you've got all the kind of the gate pillars and 3-4-story houses with the front gardens. It's worth searching for those. I've got a few as well that I've collected over the years. But the style, to me at least, looks very, very similar, if not identical, to Highbury New Park.
John Finn is being a troublemaker as always. When did the term Stokey first appear?
Ooh,
I dare say Lynn's
wow.
got
I'm going to ask Lynn Rennick to intervene. I think as part of my ongoing fascination and interest with the history of Stoke Newington, I love some of these topics that, it's not Georgian, Victorian and all that, but it's more social history and popular culture and so on. One of them, there are two questions. First of all, is Stokey as a nickname, is that, as some people told me, just yuppies in the 80s and estate agents coming up with some trendy name to attract the new middle class? Or was it used prior to that? I actually asked the question in one of the Facebook groups. It's a great group. It's called I Lived in Stoke Newington. There's a lot of people that grew up and born and raised, born and bred, all that. And I think it came down to 50-50. I think half of the people said my grandparents used to say Stokey. It's a term of endearment in the 20s and 30s. But the other half said, never heard of it. It's just in the 80s. It's just the newcomers and all those people started to brand it, and how dare they? I think someone once told me it's blasphemy. It's like, look, it's just a nickname. Don't get too serious about it. It's easier to say, I guess. But there's also the second question of how do you spell Stokey? Is it I-E or E-Y? But that's a very different talk.
Oh, that could be a whole other one. It seems to be that Hans is on Newington Green Road and is now a Ladbrokes, according to Hilary Cook. Just a question about tonight's talk from Caitlin Collins. How can we view this again online? The same link that you connected to can be used after the event. I think it takes a couple of hours for YouTube to process it, but we'll be leaving it on the Hackney Society YouTube page. There isn't a lot on the Hackney Society YouTube page, but there is a lot more on your YouTube page, isn't there?
Yeah.
What's your handle on YouTube? Is it History of
Probably
Stokey?
History of Stokey. There's so many of these handles flying around. I can pop it in the chat if people want to have a look afterwards.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll put it in the links at the bottom. But you've got quite a few of your talks. Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, we get some video snippets when it's possible, but this will be available. Yeah.
Martin Newmans, I think. Is there much work on collecting any oral histories of the area? I know there are some of Hackney.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, over the years I came across people that had an oral history project. I've got such a long to-do list or wish list of things. After Derek Baker passed away, I was really regretting not having recorded my conversations with him, because they were fascinating to hear, from someone that spent his entire life in Stoke Newington. I haven't done any of that, unfortunately, yet. I'd love to at some point when I find the time, between juggling this obsession, having a full-time job and a young family. But otherwise, I'm not aware of any past or current projects around that.
Lorenzo Sars asked whether the High Street was widened too.
Not that I'm aware of. It's fairly wide as it is, because the High Street was a very old Roman road, like a main road from Lincolnshire all the way to the City of London. So as far as I'm aware, it wasn't. I think some of the old photos, you look at the pavement, looks wider than it is, but I don't know if it's just the angle or the fact you don't have much street furniture like benches and bus stops and so on. So I'm not aware of it being widened at any point.
Frankly, this seems like mere gossip from Annette Jones, but did you know about Elizabeth I and her secret meetings with her beloved Dudley in and around Church Street?
Yes. So as some of you know, we have the Queen Elizabeth Walk, which was named in honor of Queen Elizabeth. She used to visit. There's some different sort of rumors about who she visited and when, and I heard stories about underground tunnels and so on. So I'm not sure if she would just come and spend the night, or if she spent a bit longer than that, but she had connections with some of the nobles, like the Dudleys family, and I think another family that I can't remember their name right now.
Quite a lot of discussion about how the fortunes, if you like, of Stoke Newington have changed, and what was once considered slum and was down at heel, and these things tend to go in cycles, and I think that's something we'll see more of in those 70s and 80s photographs recurring when we see those in December. Well, I think there not being any other questions other than heaps of praise.
Thank you.
I think that was an excellent talk. Thank you, Mira. I think another round of applause. Sounds very similar to the last one.
I think it's very different. Very different.
Worth just reminding you again of our next event. Very interested to know how all of you found out about this event. I know a number of people have publicised it, as well as Amir, the Hackney Society, the Hackney Archives and Hackney History have all pushed this, as well as the council. I think the mayor retweeted it. Thank you. Lots of new faces, clearly. Well, faces, you may not have faces. Lots of new people, lots of engagement and chat. Tell us how you thought it was. I know some people have been saying that it's easier to engage with this because you don't have to come out on a cold winter's night. It's something we need to think about, I think, for the future. Do drop us a line, get on the mailing lists, have a look below the link, click see more to see all of Amir's links and our links. Join our group. The next event, as you see there, is on 10th of December. I don't know if, Amir, you're going to be doing any events?
Well, I think, as some of you know, I used to do a quarterly event face-to-face. We can't do that now, so I think it's going to be more ad hoc, sporadic speaking opportunities. So if you'd like to discuss one, I'm always open to that. Otherwise, might be in the future with Hackney Society. Quite flexible, learning as I'm going along. So hopefully one at some point, but I can't say when and what topic. I'll be around on the chat for the next maybe sort of 20 minutes or so. So if you have any other questions, any other comments, if you'd like any of the links or anything like that, then just stay on the chat. I'll be on it in just a minute and we can keep talking.
Thank you, Amir. I will close by again reminding you of the talk on the 10th of December with Alan Denny. Very photographic, very worth watching, 70s and 80s. And then on the 13th of January, Laurie Elks, our very own dear Laurie Elks, will be doing a talk on the Lee Valley Regional Park. He'll be showing some photos of the 70s and 80s. So do sign up for those. They're on Eventbrite already. Only goes for me to once again and finally thank Amir and see you all next time. Thanks a lot.